The world is going through an expansion of consciousness, a changing of the ages, and many of us are on an awakening journey. I want to explore what all of this means and share people's personal stories so we can relate, enjoy the mystical experiences, and perhaps connect some more dots. Everyone's journey is completely unique. I'm your host, Wendy, and this is Light Always Wins. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's been a while since I've recorded an episode, which often happens in wintertime, which, is natural. It's nice to take a little break in the winter, and a lot has been going on behind the scenes and beneath the surface, just as it does in nature. I have been to Mexico on an amazing journey, visiting 9 different ancient temples. And right before we left for that trip, I found out that I am pregnant. So, very exciting news. And I'd love to share more about it, but today's episode is really long, so I'm going to hop right in and perhaps share some more updates soon. Today, I have my good friend Steve Herbert back to talk about one of his articles called The Mystic Light, and I'll tell you more about it when we get into our conversation. But I just wanted to let you know that you can read his article at the link in the show notes. So I highly suggest you read it. It's a really great article, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. I have a returning guest, Steve Herbert. Steve is a geologist, an anthropologist, a dowser, and a writer. And I'm excited to have him here again today. Thanks for being here, Steve.
Oh, my pleasure. A great honor.
Thanks so much. And we're going to be discussing his article called The Mystic Light. And it was published in a magazine called The Earth Star and their summer resources issue of 1985, as well as a newsletter for the Association for the Anthropological Study of Consciousness. And this was actually Steve's first published article, which is really cool. It's a very cool article about preternatural light, as you put it, Steve, and mystical experiences. I would also say experiences of enlightenment. Is there anything else you'd like to sort of introduce that article with?
I think you have it. You know,
Okay. Okay.
but preternatural is the technical word, but it essentially means supernatural. To make the point that the mystic light is a different kind of light, from the interdimensional or whatever. Um, and we'll get into that in more depth.
Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go over these major points from Steve's article, and then we're going to share our own experiences of the mystic light after that. So, would you like to take it away, Steve, and go over these points with us?
Uh, okay. As I said, the mystic light is not like the natural light we're used to every day. Um, for example, the mystic light um, is can be seen by certain people and not by others. It can it will never be harmful. Um, it can be a bright light, but would never like it wouldn't be like looking at the sun. It isn't going to hurt you.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yes, and it usually comes with a the main characteristic of the mystic light is that it always comes with a change in being.
Hmm.
And but we're going to name many different aspects of the mystic light, and every one of those aspects is really a spectrum. So we'll explain that as we go. Um, maybe a good start is to point out some examples of the mystic light you may be familiar with from the Bible. Probably the most classic one was a man by the name of Saul that was actually um, very against the the teachings of Jesus that were happening at the time, and he took it upon himself to put a stop to that. And he was on his way to Damascus, to put an end to this. And along the way, he was struck by this great blinding light that
Mm.
actually blinded him for a certain period of time after. And the experience was so powerful that he made a complete turnaround and became a supporter of Jesus. And so Saul later became what we know as Saint Paul.
Oh, okay.
Saint, yes, Saul of Tarsus became Saint Paul. Not one of the disciples or anything, but
Mhm.
um, very important um, in biblical history. Then there was Moses, who went up on the mountain to get the Ten Commandments. And while on the mountain, he experienced um, God talking to him through a burning bush.
Mhm.
Um, and I will say at this point that through this talk, we're going to talk about light, but we'll talk about fire too, because the two are so closely related.
Mhm.
The mystic light and the mystic fire. Well, this is like a mystic fire that again doesn't obey the laws of physics. So it was burning the bush, but the bush itself wasn't being consumed by the fire.
Hmm.
God spoke to Moses through that bush, and later came down off the mountain. And it, it's reported that when Moses came down the mountain, he was um, they said described him as shimmering.
Hmm.
Yeah, he was emanated kind of a light,
Mhm.
and it was so powerful that they were kind of afraid of him for a while. Yeah. Um, then there's the birth of Jesus too, whose birth was signaled by the the star that the wise men followed to find him and give him the gifts. Um, So there's debate about this star that marked the birth of Jesus.
Mhm.
Um, there were reports that there were objects in the sky, four actually, that came together and became one great light.
Mhm.
And lots of opinions. And uh, I think you, Wendy, as an astrologer, could
Yeah, there were
speak
people
to that.
around the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in 2020, which happened at 0 degrees Aquarius, which 0 is a very divine degree. A lot of people were saying that they believed that the Star of Bethlehem was actually a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. And throughout history, the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter has represented the overthrowing of one leader or one power and the rising of a new one. And so it's not that uncommon for Saturn and Jupiter to conjunct, but for it to conjunct at 0 degrees Aquarius, it was thought probably the last time that happened was around the birth of Christ. So that's why people made a really big deal about it. And I'll talk about later in my own experience with that as well.
Okay. Um, one other example from the Bible is the day of Pentecost. And this was after the death of Jesus, um, when all many people who were followers of Jesus collected in the upper room. and while there, suddenly tongues of fire appeared over all the people in the room over their heads, um, and they spoke in tongues.
Hmm.
So, um, so again, there's light and then there's fire, both mystical versions of each. Um,
Yeah, and the other thing I can't
so,
help but think about when I think about just back to the star really quick is I think of the Star of David and the symbol, that symbol, and the Merkaba, and it's also known as the hexagram. And I have a video actually where I break down the symbology of that and sort of how it can help you get into a state of coherence, which may help you experience mystical states or becoming more receptive to the divine and bringing that energy to earth. So I thought I would mention that.
yeah.
I'll put a link to the video in the show notes too if people want to watch that.
Huh. Okay. I've seen it a couple of times. Well worth watching.
Thanks,
Very
Steve.
interesting. Yeah. Um, well, as I said, each aspect has is really a whole spectrum. And as far as who experiences this kind of thing, and um, not necessarily limited to people in very spiritual study, um, not definitely not limited to religious people, but it can happen to anyone,
Mhm.
and it can happen, you know, come unsolicited at totally without any kind of warning.
Mhm.
Um,
It's funny when you mentioned Saul or Saint Paul, it actually reminded me of somebody I know who had an experience like that where they were actually they were reading the Bible and trying to prove the Bible wrong. And then they had this mystical experience where this big light came and it
oh
completely
yes,
changed them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that it would seem the person they were before was definitely um, would not be seem to be the type of person that would happen to.
Right. And it's also
Oh,
funny because in a way they were also studying, but not for the reason you would
right,
expect.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. And so this turnaround was probably, something they they intended for that lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good example of happening, very, very suddenly. Uh, the other end of the spectrum is the light appearing to someone who's um, as a result of a long period of study or initiation, or um, you know, religious life, whatever. Um, uh, and so it can happen all of a sudden, but it may happen, periodically too. Instead of one huge event, it might happen in, smaller, less intense instances.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting is in my own experience, I would say that I may have been unconsciously studying for a really long time. Like, and I think that might be the case for a lot of people where they're on some kind of path that they're not consciously aware of until they have this experience, and then all of a sudden they see how all those steps on their path led them
Yeah,
to
that would
experience.
describe my case. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so you can see how the term enlightenment comes about. Uh,
Hmm.
kind of this describes that event that really marked um, you know their that dedication to that path.
Hmm.
These aspects can really have a wide gamut of variation, but the one thing in common is that it always occurs with a rupture in planes of consciousness.
When I read that, I what I thought of was how do I say this? The meeting or the combination or the marriage of the left and the right brain. When I heard rupture of
Huh?
consciousness, I was trying to think, what is, or rupture of planes of consciousness, rupture in the planes of consciousness. That's kind of the visualization I got, is the two sides of the brain like meeting. But I'm curious, what does that mean to you? Rupture in planes of consciousness. How do you
Well,
describe that?
we 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 may be very entrenched in our, you know, normal everyday three-dimensional reality,
Mhm.
um, um, with our firm sense of the laws of physics that are immutable. Um, but that then this happens and shows you that there's much more to reality than we thought.
Gotcha.
There's um, many things that can describe what happens in an experience like this. Certainly, it may come with a lot of emotion.
Mm. Hmm.
It can occur with sudden occurrence of certain abilities, which we might call supernatural, and may come with tremendous intellectual enlightenment, or with great healing.
And I wanted to ask you, why do you think that is? Do you have any ideas about why you think this would result in those types of, I guess, enhancements?
Um, yes, because we broke through to the greater reality
Mm.
and are not no, any longer, um, tied to the laws of physics as we know it in our three-dimensional reality.
Yeah, and maybe also it's it's like you're connecting to the greater all, and like you're sort of transcending the self in a way, or the ego. So perhaps that gives you more access to all of this other information and healing abilities, having that greater understanding.
Yes, transcendence is a good word to explain that.
Mm.
Transcendence of the three-dimensional world we know,
Mm-hmm.
and the laws of physics that we think are, you know, set in stone.
Mm-hmm.
There's often a feeling of feeling unity with the universe in
Mm-hmm.
these experiences. Yeah.
There's actually a point I think you might have skipped over that I really liked.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
you said it may be a radiance of one's true self, a divinity, or a greater reality. And I really like that part about the true self.
Yes. Um, and also, there's the point too that light doesn't necessarily, we might perceive it as coming from without, but
Mhm.
actually the light is within us all the time.
Mhm.
Um, be it just a tiny point of light, but it resides in your heart. And what you're feeling is just a, a sudden releasing of this
Hmm.
within yourself.
I like that, and I think it's also a little bit of a paradox, because I think it's both. I think it's within us and without us. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's within each of us, and we're all connected. So yes, you could just say it's within us, but
Yeah. Yeah.
in this 3D experience, it's all around you too.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like lightning, I guess.
Hmm.
It comes from both above and below.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yes. It can be one experience that comes, you know, um, pretty spectacular. Uh, but sometimes it occurs more in stages that
Mhm.
are, not as grand. Um,
I
but
know today we're
so,
going to talk about our biggest experiences, but I'm curious, do you feel like you've had more than one experience of this?
well, after having the one big experience, you can see in retrospect
Mhm.
certain things that happened leading up to and following.
Mhm.
Um, so perhaps when I come around to giving my own story, I can see um, tell about what I saw in retrospect that
Cool.
happened leading up to or following. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same
Yeah.
way. That's cool.
Yeah. And also point out the aspects of my own experience that are um, go along with the certain points we're going over now. There's the alchemists. Um, they they thought of that their focus was more on fire really than light, and that's interesting.
Hmm.
And what they aim to do is to really take that mystic fire and and incorporate it into their own being. But it can be come out from within too. Like the Buddhists have a concept of samadhi, and that translates flash of fire that indicates feeling of reaching nirvana and that level of consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of hear that term, like, how can you stand in the fire and not get burned?
Mhm.
And it makes me think about, alchemy is all about transmutation, transmuting a lower
Mhm.
form into a higher form.
Yes.
And so there's an aspect of transmutation through this too.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
somehow through this process, you're burning off something that's no longer needed, feels
Mm-hmm.
like, to get to a
Hmm.
truer essence of what's actually there.
Right. Yeah. So I think the alchemists aim for um, gaining a mastery over fire,
Hmm.
and makes me think of um, so it used to be a trendy thing a while ago, to make coals and spread them out and do a fire walk.
Hmm.
And
Well, that's ancient too, isn't it? Like in India?
I'm sure it goes way back.
Yeah.
And you know, and a lot of scientists have tried to explain it, and with in according to the laws of physics, what we know.
Hmm.
Um, um, but and so um, people like you and I and our listeners may think of it more as having gained a mastery over fire that allows us to walk on the fires. But I can tell one story about a man that I know who, while he was in college, um, uh, he he was with a buddy of his, and they went out to a bar and they had a few drinks, and then they came upon this group that were doing this coal walking, fire walking thing, and they had a few drinks, and they they dared each other to do it. Well, they took off their shoes and socks, and they stepped onto the coals, and they walked right through it without being harmed.
So it goes to show you how
Yeah.
it's more about an altered state of consciousness, whether it's through the self or maybe through
Well,
alcohol.
right, right.
That's funny.
Hmm. Do you have any more points that jump out at you that need explanation?
Um, it's interesting you said it has nothing to do with deliverance or salvation
Oh, oh
and
yes.
everything to do with integration with the universe. And something I
Hmm.
thought was interesting about that statement is that the healing experience that you might feel from one of these experiences, it does feel like salvation to me. I mean, that was
Oh,
sort of my experience.
yeah, yeah.
Not that I saw it as somebody else necessarily. I don't know if I had a concrete idea of what it was, whether it was within me or outside of me. I guess it felt more outside of me in my own case because
Hmm.
it was so miraculous, you know? It's
Uh-huh.
like it was like a soul retrieval. So
Uh-huh. Yeah.
so it was like if you go through something and you have no idea how it happened,
Hmm.
it's hard for you to believe it was you, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, not, well, most people aren't attuned with their greater selves. And at a point like that, definitely rises up to meet you and does feel like it's from without.
And I
Mhm.
think that also has to do with thousands of years of that religious programming as well, that it's all outside of us and that we're lower than or less than anything
Mm-hmm.
fine.
Right.
I think that has a lot to do with the perception as well of salvation and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
And again, I could also say it's both, you know?
Yes, but there's a good point that it's not because you believe in a certain dogma,
Hmm.
um, or that you're um, forgiven of your sins,
Yeah.
anything like that. Um, it it just is a moment where you find resonance with the whole universe,
Hmm.
and yeah, and become in sync with it, and that let that experience in.
I love how you describe that.
Yeah.
You talked about quartz crystals
Oh,
in ritual.
yes.
Has
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, go
That's
ahead.
a good point. The etymology of the two terms, crystal and Christ. Um, sure, it's really no accident. Um, a crystal does collect light, and a lot of people will say information as well, and can give off that light too. So it's yeah, it seems pretty natural to compare that Christ state of consciousness as both being an absorber of that light and emanating it also.
Hmm. Yeah, and the other word that I think of is chrism, which is
Mm.
another word for oil, and it can represent an actual oil you're mixing. And the word
Hmm.
Christ can mean anointed one, which is, when they anoint somebody with oil and then they're shining, they're
Oh,
emanating
yes.
that light. But as
Mhm.
well, the
Yeah.
chrism also represents the cerebral spinal fluid that
Hmm.
rises in the body to create like a kundalini experience.
Oh, yes.
Where you would reach that state of consciousness.
Uh, oh, yeah. You reminded me of something point I was going to make that that rising of the Kundalini rises up from the root chakra, um, and to through the chakra, all the chakras till it reaches the crown chakra, and it's really the light of that seventh chakra that you're seeing with
Mm.
the nimbus around the head. Yeah.
Yeah, and the halo, nimbus and halo are
Halo,
the same
the
thing,
halo,
right?
right? Hmm.
Yeah. It's funny, I actually, after I had my experience, I had a couple people tell me I looked like I was glowing.
Oh, yes.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah. Um, it, yeah, yeah, actually, come to
Oh,
think of
that's
it,
funny.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like with Moses. It might not look exactly like light, but it's kind of a shimmering
Mhm.
um, that you're perceiving more on a spiritual level than
Mhm.
you know. Yeah.
And that might be like what the Buddhists describe as like the rainbow light body too, right?
Mm. hmm But it goes to show too. It's not it's not just a person's ability to shine the light forth, but it's also a matter of the person's ability to perceive that.
Hmm.
Mm.
And it's interesting in my case, the two people who noticed it, I consider uh to be very intuitive.
Mhm.
And I think
Yes.
they probably had some mystical experiences themselves.
hmm
That's interesting to reflect on.
hmm Um, yeah, it makes me think of what people are calling the orbs,
Hmm.
those little globes of light that people see sometimes, and but more often we'll take a picture with a camera, and the orbs will show up in the picture.
Yeah.
Um, yes, to show that those those orbs were there, but our physical eyes didn't have the ability to, catch that where it did appear on film or get captured electronically these days.
I think that's so interesting. And I've taken pictures like that before. I used to live across the street from a Catholic church, and it was one that the Pope actually used to come visit in Boston. And I was taking pictures all around my neighborhood at night with a flash on. And when I looked through the pictures and I got to the church, there were so many orbs around it. It looked like it was snowing in the picture.
Oh,
And I
wow.
thought, wow, how interesting. And it's surrounding a church. You know,
Mm-hmm.
how do you explain that?
Yes, very, very interesting.
Mhm.
Um,
So it's like, is
speak-
that us without our human form? You know, or is it just, what is it? Is it just
Oh,
energy?
mhm. Um, I don't think anything is just energy, actually. It'd be energy, but with consciousness.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I like how you put that.
Yeah. Um, Experience of mine was 1988. I made a trip to Peru and it was a shamanic adventure tour. And um, so I visited Machu Picchu and walked around the Temple of the Sun. And there are various stones where one could either stand against or sit on or lay on, to experience the energy there. And so I kind of handed to another tourist, happened to be wandering by, and asked them to take a picture of me standing against that stone. And later, the picture came out with orbs all around me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yes.
And
So
did you feel any presences like in that moment?
um, I was very open to it, but I can't say I felt much of anything in
Yeah.
particular. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Steve has a lot of cool pictures. And maybe I can include them in the Instagram post for this so people can see because he's got a lot of neat light phenomena captured on
Uh,
film.
yes. One of them was the orb that appeared in my garden, and I just had to be randomly taking pictures there and only noticed that afterwards. And in fact, I didn't really pick up on it until, months later, actually, when I took a closer look at it
Oh,
and
wow.
expanded it a little bit. Um, and was a beautiful globe of white light, but with a fringe of little rainbow colors around it. Yeah.
It reminds me of the Wizard of Oz a little bit, like a
Oh,
like
yeah.
a medicine wheel almost. It has all the colors in it, you know?
Uh, yes, that you remember Glinda in the movie
Hmm.
um, appeared to the gathering at the end of the movie. She just came drifting in as an orb and then manifest back into a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely been
Um,
through some meditations where I've traveled that way as well, where you step into this. Usually it's kind of like you can imagine an egg or anything you'd like, but you kind of like step into this orb and then your consciousness can travel to different
mm,
places.
hmm Some of the other pictures were taken in Honduras.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember giving a demonstration to a class there and demonstrating a dowsing instrument I'd seen in a country right south of that. And the person I saw it took what looked like a piano wire and made it was a pretty stiff wire, so it made a big loop, and
Mhm.
you hold the ends of it against your sides,
Mhm.
like against your adrenals or whatever's there. And as you're approaching a vein of water, that loop of wire will twist and twist into a figure eight.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Um, but I was demonstrating this in the classroom, and the picture came out with this fiery flame-like um, image right in front of the dowsing rod.
Wow. You
Yeah.
know what? I don't know if you ever got to see this, but when we were visiting the chamber in Vermont, I think it was calendar one, um, Sandy McKenzie had this special lens out and she was taking video. She wasn't really even recording it. She just had it over her phone in
Uh-huh.
video and was looking around. And
Uh-huh.
right where you are always holding your dowsing rods, there was
Uh-huh.
light. There was like this
Uh-huh.
rainbow light, and you weren't dowsing or anything, but the light
Uh-huh.
was like living right there. And
Uh-huh.
she goes, "Look at Steve." She goes, "Look at that light right where he dowses."
Oh,
And
oh,
so it was funny. I don't know if she told you about it,
oh.
but
No,
there were so
no,
many
first
people
time I hear
around.
about it.
Oh, that's funny. There were so many
Huh.
people around and so much going on. But
Uh-huh.
that leads me to a question, which is a little off topic, but it seems like a good
Uh-huh.
time to ask it. Uh, so it seems like dowsing can somewhat be thought of as science, but it also seems very divinely guided. Would you agree?
Yes, very much.
Yeah. So it's not just about um, positive and negative energy. Just like you said, nothing's just energy. There's a consciousness too.
Uh, yeah, and I understand it more as the forces, you know,
Hmm.
as Rudolf Steiner talks about.
Cool. Well, that's a conversation for another day, but
Uh-huh.
there was one other thing I thought was interesting that you mentioned about antlers and horns.
Oh,
You said light from each side of the brain may be associated with antlers or horns. Thus, there is an association between horned gods versus devils. And before, when we were talking about this a little bit, I couldn't help but think about the Egyptian gods and especially a lot of the goddesses that have the cow horns. And you explained to me that
oh yes.
cow horns are receptive, whereas antlers are more like radiating.
Yes. Yes. The horns draw the energy in and the antlers send it out. But those examples of the horns were, well, it was as if the both the left and right brains were sending out or bringing in uh, light, energy, whatever, um, in separate paths. So it looks like two streams on either side of the head.
Mm.
And
With like one
so
coming in and one going out, is that what you mean?
I, I mean, whether they're the horns on each side of the head,
Yeah.
one for the left brain and one for the right brain, operating at the same time. But, so in those cases, those horns were had a positive divine meaning or symbolism or
Mhm.
use, and but you can see how over time that those other indigenous religions, um, pagan religions that were, had experienced that, um, those the horns at least became to be a symbolize a more of a devilish kind
Yeah.
of being.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? With Christianity coming in and sort of demonizing paganism, you can kind of see where that happened. And the other thing
Mm-hmm.
I think is interesting is you see the horns. Well, now maybe this is more recent or just the more popular sort of symbol. The devil horns tend to look like more like cow horns than antlers,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right,
Which
right.
to me also kind of symbolizes that denigration of the feminine receptive power.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, is there anything else you wanted to go over?
I want to make this point because it'll be relevant when I tell my story, that the experience of the light can have both universal and personal aspects, sometimes at the same time. So in what I was experiencing, that some people, um, the experience of the mystic light has more of a personal meaning,
Hmm.
um, and in other cases it may definitely have a more cultural meaning,
Hmm.
and then but you know the highest examples of course are universal meaning,
Hmm.
so it can run that gamut. So a person who has a vision can be anywhere on that spectrum,
Hmm.
you know, and sometimes it's obvious, where on the spectrum they are.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that can get kind of muddy too, or you're like, am I seeing this because it's just universal knowledge or is it personally applicable to me, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Should emphasize too um, that the light may come from long periods of training or spontaneously, but um, spontaneously because you suddenly had a moment of being totally lined up with the universe and all. But it can also come from through grace, you
Hmm.
know, and not really evident how you might have earned that or
Yeah.
developed that, but it just happens and spontaneously.
Hmm. I
Um,
think it's really interesting too, um, sometimes it seems like these experiences, being an astrologer, I have to say,
oh
well,
yes.
to look at someone's chart, sometimes it looks as though it's predestined by where the planets are in somebody's birth chart. Not saying that it would absolutely happen, but the planets have set them up to have some sort of experience, which I find
Uh-huh.
fascinating. That
Mm-hmm.
happened to me. So,
Uh, uh-huh. So you're saying it's uh had that that the alignment has determined the way they are, or the other way around? Is that what you're saying?
I'll make it specific as an example for myself. The Saturn and Jupiter were conjuncting on my sun and Venus.
Oh.
At the time I saw that in the sky and also had my awakening. So that
Mm-hmm.
was very personal to me. And all the symbology that goes along with those two planets conjuncting made sense
Mm-hmm.
with the experience that I had. So I there's a possibility that if I hadn't been ready, I may not have experienced anything. But
Mm-hmm.
I also kind of like to wonder about the idea of our soul setting certain benchmarks up in our life that
Mm-hmm.
where you say, "Oh, I think I'm going to have this experience at this point. Like this is going to be my activation point if all goes well." You know?
Uh-huh.
And I think that through astrology and following the cycles of the planets, some of this we can get some little clues about, um, why certain things happen in life, or we can at least
Oh,
see the
yeah.
energy behind it through the
Mm-hmm.
archetypes of the planets and the signs.
Mm-hmm.
And I have
Mm-hmm.
to mention while we're on this topic, this conversation is perfect right now because the nodes are in the north node is in Aries and the south node is in Libra. And these are the nodes of the moon. So the north node represents our collective destiny, and the south node represents our past and our karma. And
Uh-huh.
so with the north node being in Aries right now, Aries is the divine spark. So we're
Oh.
having this conversation about how we've experienced the divine spark. And it
Uh-huh.
would indicate that that is the collective's destiny right now is to be, discovering that divine spark within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that's really cool as well is you talk about in your article, you reference the age of crystal or the crystal age.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just, representing this age of enlightenment that a lot of us feel we're coming into. And many refer to it as the age of Aquarius. And a lot of
Uh-huh.
people feel that when that Saturn and Jupiter conjunction happened in 2020, that was sort of an intro into the age of Aquarius. And that's all debatable. Some people say it was the 60s, but either way,
Mm-hmm.
through these experiences, you also reference the flash of lightning, how it can be like a flash of lightning. Um,
Uh-huh.
well, Aquarius's modern planetary ruler is Uranus, and Uranus is like lightning. Uranus is the
Mm-hmm.
electrical energy, and it's all about understanding frequency. And it's also all about remembering and connecting with a higher consciousness, connecting
Mm-hmm.
with a higher mind. So it's just, I love the timing of this conversation with the nodes, especially, but the planets are sort of showing us why we're talking
Oh.
about these things as well, you know?
Oh, oh, yes. And why it might be uh people listening are, more receptive to it at this time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been through pretty much all of our major points. Might be time to tell our stories.
All right. So, Steve, would you like to share your story?
Okay. Um,
And I want to say really quickly, thank you so much for sharing your story because I know this isn't something you've really shared publicly before, right? Or not?
um, actually, um, very, very few people have I ever disclosed all this with,
Well,
um,
we really appreciate
let
you.
alone on you know, sending it out to the whole world here. Um, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is because it was such a special experience. I just don't want to, you know, it's more precious, just kept privately.
Mhm.
Another reason was the experience was so powerful that I could hardly get through it without tearing up. There's, there's so much emotion with it.
Yeah, like as you're retelling it.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Didn't you say you also felt like it was time? Like it's time to share?
yes, yes. Time to make the story public.
Yeah.
Um, because I think we're on the verge of a transition to see ourselves as human beings and our race, in a new light
Mm,
and our destiny. I want to start a little bit ahead and cover some background,
mhm.
um, because it will be relevant, you know, when I get through the whole story. Uh,
Great.
uh, so I want to start the story around um, 1980, 81. I was finished my undergraduate degree in geology, and I headed out west, ready to start my career as a geologist. And at the time, um, it seemed that was absolutely the best choice that I could have made, as the field was booming at the time, and I could start right in and make a lot of money and rise up to the ranks quickly. Um, so I so I headed out west, my degree in geology, and I did work more both in mineral exploration and oil exploration, probably more in the oil fields than anything. Um, so I I was only about a year and a half into my career as a geologist when everything changed and my life got turned around completely. So right at that time, there was an oil glut. So the prices of oil plummeted, and so that depressed the market, and not just for oil, but for mineral exploration too. So uh, a lot of geologists found themselves losing their jobs about this time, and I could see it coming for me too. So I tried to prepare myself. Um, so with the money I made, I decided that I would use some of it to go to graduate school, and I used part of it to take a trip that I always wanted to take, and um, that trip was to sign up for a trekking tour in Nepal, hiking on the trail to base camp on Mount Everest,
Mm,
and also exploring Egypt and visiting the pyramids, and Nepal, also visiting um, a lot of Buddhist monasteries, and um, so that was quite an experience. Um, but I applied to a lot of schools to continue uh, geo my geology. I figured if I got a master's in geology, uh, perhaps when I was done, the field would be opened up, and I could do even better. But there are so many other geologists in the same position that the universities could pretty much demand a 4.0 grade point average,
mm,
um, you know, to weed out people, and I I I didn't have quite that kind of
mm,
a GPA. So I thought, uh, well, heck with it. Heck with worrying about being practical. I'm just gonna study something that I always had a passion for also, and that was anthropology and archaeology. And the University of Montana in Missoula accepted me, and I started out thinking I would be a geoarchaeologist. Well, again, the spirit turned me in a different direction, and ended up in straight social and cultural anthropology, but found myself kind of concentrating more on religious and psychological anthropology.
Hmm.
Um, Now for my thesis, I I thought maybe I'd do something with medicine men or shamans on all the Indian reservations or all around me. My The chair of my committee said that that was really um, uh, too big of a scope for a master's thesis. I'd have to spend a long time making acquaintances and developing relationships and cultivating their trust before I could start, really asking them deep questions and all. But she said, "Well, why don't you just study all the Pentecostals in this town of Missoula?" And that sort of took me aback, but I began to think about it and say, well, there's some commonalities here, shamans, they have methods of in, cultivating abilities and knowledge that were beyond what they could access, as in a normal state of consciousness. And that's kind of what the Pentecostals do. You know,
Mm.
they they have their methods to invoke special abilities and knowledge that would not be available otherwise. So I spent about 9 months um, alternating among 7 different Pentecostal congregations in the Missoula area, and they range from very, very conservative to a more liberal end of the spectrum. And the more liberal end of the spectrum was the charismatic Catholics.
Mm.
Um, that is, Catholics who believe in speaking in tongues and gifts of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. Um, so I began my circulation among the various congregations. And once in a while, there'd be a special guest invited, evangelist from some place that would give their spiel and then offer a chance for people to experience being slain in the spirit.
Mm.
And the listeners don't know quite what that is and weren't around when I was so far back that has to see Oral Roberts doing slaying on this of the spirit on people on television. But it's when the evangelist healer will come up to a person and say, "In the name of Jesus, be healed," and touch touch their hand to their forehead, for example, and then that person will slump over backwards,
Mhm.
um, losing all control of their uh, of their ability to stand up. And um, then at the points, some of them will have their prayers answered, and they'll experience certain uh, healings. Well, so I had something in mind uh, on this day when I went to evangelical healing service and asked for my ear infections to be healed.
Mhm.
And so I went up to the front of the church after he did his spiel, and I was lined up shoulder to shoulder with all people, the entire width of the church. But he started on one end and, and said, "In the name of Jesus, be healed." Touched the forehead, and over they went. And the elders in back of them would catch them and lay them on the floor. Um, and so I just kept looking down and seeing them fall, kind of like dominoes, one at a time, closer and closer to me. and each side of me, people were very, very emotional states.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, I'm going to feel very foolish here. I'm the only one left standing, and
Yeah.
yeah, and but I was being the participant observer, as both a scientist um, and a person in the under the congregation. And he got to me and said, "In the name of Jesus, be healed," and touched my forehead, and to my great surprise, over I went. And I had no control to be able to stand up, and I laid on the floor. And after some time, I finally regained uh, the ability to use my limbs and got up.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't feel like I had any healing, and so I went on home. But that night, I had a visionary dream. It was about a woman, a blonde woman in a white wedding gown, and it was only a few days later I met that woman,
Mm.
and who I became engaged to, and her name was Stephanie. Uh, but she happened to be a charismatic Catholic.
Mm.
And among that group, they announced that there's this opportunity to join a busload of charismatic Catholics and drive all the way up to Great Falls, Montana, up close to the Canadian border. And their Catholic evangelical priest was coming to speak there. His name was Father Diorio.
Mm.
So I was really looking forward to this as a great opportunity for my research. And, uh, well, uh, come the night before that big event, and I I came down sick, and I had a really hard case of the flu. And that morning, I felt terrible, and um, I was so sick I could hardly even sit up in bed. But I
Mhm.
was so determined to experience this that somehow I managed to get out of bed and get dressed, and I joined the rest of my new friend Stephanie and that those group of charismatic Catholics, and we boarded the bus. Spent the whole way up, laying down across my seat and across her lap,
Mhm.
and made it all the way to Great Falls. And we went in this huge gymnasium, and we got our seats in the bleachers. And there I sat with beside her. I was just bent over, clutching my stomach, and I was not thinking of anything else except just keeping my keeping myself together and not, you know, letting go with all these people in front of me. That would be embarrassing
Yeah.
to say the least. And there was a band up front prior to Father Diorio coming up, and it was beautiful, beautiful music. And so that's playing and, and enjoying the music as I uh, clutch my stomach, keep keep it together, and and Father Diorio had not even had a chance yet to get on the stage when suddenly I was hit with something tremendous, um, kind of like a grand piano dropping out of the skies and landing on me.
Mm.
Hit me hard. It was a tremendous energy that hit me, and and at the same time, I've had my eyelids closed this whole time by clutching my stomach, bent over like that. And at the same time this energy hit me, I also had a vision. And this is the hard part. Uh, I saw everyone, everyone in that auditorium, not as they looked ordinarily,
Mhm.
but everyone had took the image and likeness of Jesus.
Mm.
And so um, spent Father Durio came up on stage and talked for a long time as I still had tears coming down my face. Um, I couldn't even tell Stephanie what was happening to me.
Mhm.
And she was very patiently understanding and let me experience what I was experiencing. Um, But after a while, I realized I didn't have the flu anymore.
Mm.
I had been completely cured of the flu in an instant.
Mhm.
So after a while, I regained my composure and and Father Diorio finished his talk, and then we all got to um, all leave the bleachers and come down and mill around out front and out in the middle. And we ran into somebody that Stephanie knew, and I had a little chance to tell her what happened to me. And we met a friend of hers, and apparently her friend had some kind of physical condition. And um, Stephanie asked me, well, um, why don't you slay her in the spirits?
Mhm.
I said, well, first reaction was, who, me?
Yeah.
So, so I, I did it. I said, I stood in front of her and in the name of Jesus, be healed. I touched her forehead. Over she went.
That's so wild.
Well, uh,
Did you feel anything when that happened?
um, I, I really didn't.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you before we move on. I know the experience is like it's very emotional, but I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about what it felt like when you saw everyone as Jesus, because I'm not sure everyone kind of can understand what that was like. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, that's hard to put in words. I don't know if there are words for it. But I had had one previous experience when I was in undergraduate school, when I was um, taking a Catholic, I mean, a calculus course.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's see where my mind is.
yeah.
Um, and it was the hardest course I had to take, but I needed it to graduate. So I I was up almost every evening with the tutors, trying to get through this course in calculus. And one night I had a visionary dream where I had a, a tremendous feeling of expansion of consciousness. And
Mm.
in that state, um, I I knew everything there was to know about Catholic, like, calculus.
Calculus.
Uh,
That's
every
wild.
I knew absolutely everything. So I
Oh,
knew more about calculus than Isaac Newton at that point, you know, and and all at once, all that was in my mind at one point. I knew everything about calculus. Now, this experience lasted a few moments, maybe a minute or two, and
mhm.
then I felt it starting to fade away.
Mm.
And I felt myself sinking back to my normal state of consciousness.
Did you retain any of it?
Um, as it's happening, I'm saying to myself, please let me keep this at least till the
Right.
test is over. But no, I I did reach sink back into my normal state of consciousness, but I would eventually pass the course.
Hmm.
Yeah. And to me, this was an experience of um, experiencing the mind of God,
Mm.
an
Mm.
omniscient mind of God. Well, so now I, I I tell you this because now it's easier to explain that what I experienced in Great Falls, Montana was more like experiencing the love of God.
Hmm. Like emanating from every single
Yeah.
person.
Uh, yes.
That
So,
just sounds so incredible. And I can understand why it would be so emotional too,
yes.
because it's such a, we don't really experience that very often in our everyday lives to that extent.
Yeah. Yeah. And each of one of these people, um, in the image and likeness of Jesus the Christ, um, all of them had this nimbus around them. And
Hmm.
so that this was both like seeing seeing that light and but also being aware of it all the time, other than sight, like the shimmering. And,
Hmm.
um, so this being well, this was the inspiration for this article I wrote, The Mystic Light,
Yeah.
is seeing that. Um, so in my research for that article, it, I did run across the comment a few times that it's not very often that you see that mystic light associated with kind of a deity.
Hmm.
But here I was experiencing it not only with a deity, but hundreds of them,
Hmm.
that light around them, and and uh, and with that love emanating from them too.
And I have to ask you, do you feel like, I'm curious if you feel like the seeing everybody kind of represented as Jesus, if that was because of your upbringing or because of where you were? Or do you have any ideas of why you saw Jesus specifically?
Yes. I mentioned earlier about that, a vision can show a lot of personal aspects or cultural aspects,
Yeah.
and then sometimes universal.
Hmm.
Um, so I would say that yes, that totally was in sync with the way I believed,
Mm.
but it was totally out of sync with what everyone in that auditorium believed.
Yeah. Isn't that so wild?
Um, so I think the energy of the group, all those there for a spiritual purpose,
Hmm.
was maybe a catalyst for the energy that hit me.
Yeah.
You um, but I, I also, besides visiting these various congregations,
Hmm.
um, I also uh, went to a regular Bible study,
Mm.
one of the more conservative um, denominations.
Hmm.
And I couldn't wait till um, the next meeting to tell them about what happened to me. You know, I,
Yeah.
yeah, I expected them to be, really happy for me.
Right?
Um, so I sat there in the Bible study, you know, very excited about what happened to me, and told them of my experience, and seeing everybody in the auditorium in the image and likeness of Jesus. And there was only silence, dead silence.
It's sad and I'm not surprised at the same time because, yeah, isn't it funny? Like, were you sort of thinking maybe somebody else in this group has experienced something like this before?
Well, I, I was hoping,
Yeah.
actually, I thought certainly they would be able to relate to that.
Yeah.
Just finally, the pastor raised his head and said, "Well, I'm trying to be polite, I think." It says, "Well, we don't really think like that."
Woo! So wild.
Uh,
It says so much about like personal experience, you know?
hmm
It's just there's nothing um there's really you can't compare outside knowledge or anything else to what you experience yourself, you know?
hmm hmm
And then I had a similar thing, after my experience trying to find somebody who had also experienced something similar, thinking there would be more people,
Yeah.
And you're like,
Uh-huh.
oh, it can kind of make you feel lonely.
Uh, yes. Yes. That that's one thing that made me um, vow that I would be very, very careful about who I told this to.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense. Yeah.
but but I do think that what I saw in my vision was a higher vision, um, and that is a vision of the future,
Hmm.
what the future could be and should be.
Is that we all embody that Christ-like consciousness, like
Yes.
unity
Yeah.
consciousness?
Yes. And um, that um, Jesus was here as an example,
Hmm.
and and to show us what we can be, every one of us.
Yeah.
We're destined to be.
Yeah. It seems he came at one of the darkest times in human history too.
Uh, uh, uh-huh.
Just so we wouldn't forget. It's like
hmm
I
hmm
feel like a lot of these avatars are like I call them avatars, for that consciousness. It's like
Uh-huh.
they seem to come in as like placeholders, as like bookmarks in
Yes.
human
Right.
story.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And now it's like it seems like we're coming to a time where the momentum is building, the wave is getting stronger, and um and it's yeah, I think it's so interesting thinking about how a lot of us have been taught to perceive divinity as something outside of us and something greater than
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and how that also kind of messes with the ego too, like I can see there's a shadow side sometimes to some of these experiences too. And some I've experienced myself where you could come out of it and think you are like this important being, or you know what I mean? Like, or
Mm-hmm.
higher than others. And it's like you're kind of missing the point, or like you haven't learned it yet,
Yes.
but it's in within all of us.
Yeah, there is that potential. And
Yeah.
I recognize that, so uh, it, it
Did you recognize that like pretty quickly on your journey, or was there some like
pretty,
adjust?
yes, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense too
Mm-hmm.
because of the settings you were in and how you were taking this objective perspective of what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now I can point out um, what led up to that and,
Okay.
what transpired since that.
Hmm.
Um, so I already mentioned about my experience of great expansion of consciousness and enough to take in all of calculus all in one moment. You
Yeah.
know, yeah. Um, and how they say that um, things can come in threes that
Hmm.
are really important for you to pay attention to.
Hmm.
Um, well, it happened again in with when I was in French class. You know, ironically, I had chosen to go for a Bachelor of Science degree rather than a Bachelor of Arts degree to avoid the language requirement. So when I went for my Master of Arts degree, I I couldn't avoid that any longer.
Ah.
So I had some French in high school, so I I just continued with that,
Hmm.
but had a hard time with it.
Mm.
Yeah. But I had a tremendous expansion of consciousness in a dream state, visionary dream, I'll say, um, one night when I could hear French spoken and understand it perfectly, and I could speak French myself perfectly. So I just so again,
Love it.
I
It's almost like you're
hopefully,
experiencing a parallel reality?
yeah, yes. Um, so yes, I experienced that sense of expansion of consciousness again for the second time.
Hmm.
And so after, and I think it wasn't till after the that experience in Great Falls that I had a visionary dream, but this time uh, I visited a past life of mine in a dream,
Mm.
and I went experienced the whole lifetime
Hmm.
from beginning to very traumatic death.
Mm.
Um, in fact, after the experience in Great Falls, one of the things that happened afterwards was I went through a period of having um, past life flashbacks on several lives, actually four,
Hmm.
and I think that they were all somehow relevant to this lifetime.
Hmm. Do you feel like
Um,
seeing those helped you resolve certain themes in this lifetime?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it was important to know.
Hmm.
So I think it opened up that experience in Great Falls, opened up something in me that allowed me to see these past lifetimes.
Yeah. That's like the rupture in planes of consciousness you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like being able, your mind going beyond space and time in a way
Hmm.
and going to other times.
Hmm. I will only say this. I want to keep these pretty private, but the only thing I'll say was one of them was a past life back at the time of Jesus.
Hmm. That's pretty cool. So that also could be a reason why you saw all those people as Jesus too. If you had been alive at the time that he was alive and you knew him, you know, it's like that makes me I just connected those dots right there.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Hmm.
hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. And in that state, examining a past life, I don't know if you have an experience of your own you can compare to, but you see people that you recognize,
Hmm.
and they might be in a totally different body, and they are in a different body, but maybe even a different sex, but you recognize them as someone you know in
Yeah.
this life.
And it's interesting,
So,
right? It's like you just know their energy somehow because they look
yeah.
different, but somehow you know
Yeah.
who they are.
Mhm. Um, so one of those people I recognized was Stephanie.
Hmm.
I was married to her
In another life.
at that time. Yeah.
Wow. And did you replay similar patterns in this life, or was it different?
Well, I think this was a case where we were meant to come together in this lifetime, but it wasn't, you know, it was just for a certain period.
Mm-hmm.
So what actually happened was as the months we spent together, I gradually became more and more New Age-ish,
Mm-hmm.
while she became more and more conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And so after a while, the relationship didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
So I love Montana, and I would have loved to have stayed there, but the breakup happened, and uh, I couldn't find a job. I was getting to run out of money. So this was definitely a dark night of the soul for me. And so I just said, well, I'm just going to go back east, be around my family with that support, and I can figure out what I'm going to do with my life from that point. So following Montana, um, I feel spirit led me back to um, the East Coast again. And it wasn't long after that that I discovered that the American Society of Dowsers national headquarters were just like 30 miles away from where I grew up.
Mm.
I grew up in Littleton, New Hampshire, and headquarters for the ASD were in Danville, Vermont. So I came back east, and then while I was trying to figure out what to do in my life, I was inspired to write this article, The Mystic Light. This paper um, published, The Mystic Light, but then they asked me if I would go to uh, the annual convention, the American Society of Dowsers, with a press pass and cover the convention.
Mhm.
So that led me to the Dowser Society. They actually never published my article about the convention, but I was hooked.
Yeah.
And that was 1985, almost 40 years ago.
Wow.
So Spirit took me, the geologist heading west, steered me in a whole different direction, um, um, to go back to college, to go to anthropology instead of geology, and switch from archaeology to social and cultural, and do a thesis on Pentecostalism and speaking in tongues, and then bring me back to the East, and and sent me to the American Society of Dowsers. I found my family there. Shortly after, I began getting interested in water dowsing,
Hmm.
and then I had the opportunity to go into Peace Corps, and I ended up in Senegal, West Africa, to be an agroforestry extension agent. Uh, but I was allowed to travel all around the country and douse water well sites as a sideline. You
So cool.
and with such success that I, came back and decided to do that domestically. But not long after, I was approached by um, a Vermont expat living in Honduras. I got a call from him to ask me to go down to Honduras after Hurricane Mitch, as under the U.S. Partners in the America program, and train rural farmers to douse as a way to restore water resources.
Mm.
Yeah. That led to 11 trips total in Latin America and the Caribbean. Then my time, and during that time also I had a large role in the Water for Humanity Fund,
Mm.
which is operated under the auspices of the American Society of Dowsers, funding water resource development in um, foreign foreign countries, developing countries usually. Um, when my time with that was done, I'm now focused a lot on agricultural dowsing. Uh, more soils than water now, uh,
Hmm.
but, but I still water douse. Uh,
I love how it started with the earth and it just kind of kept progressing into these other
oh
fields.
yeah, the Earth as the geologist
Uh-huh.
came full circle.
Hmm. And it's so funny too. I hope, do you mind if I share what your sun and rising are?
Uh, oh, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
Steve's a Aquarius sun and rising, which I think is so interesting with this whole story because as we were talking about earlier, like how this Aquarian age, how Aquarius is ruled by Uranus and it's like that flash of lightning and you kind of had an experience like that. And not only that, you said when you saw this vision in the gymnasium, you saw the future. And Aquarius is all about the future. And I feel like, you know, these experiences are more talked about now and becoming more common and popular, but it's almost like as an Aquarius and experiencing this in the 80s, you're kind of like one of these pioneers of our time, like
Uh-huh.
sort of ahead of your time,
Yeah.
And also Aquarius is the water bearer and you're
Yes.
helping people find water.
Hmm.
It's like your company is actually uh you have what is it called again? Your
Well,
dowsing? Or
uh,
is it just the
uh,
logo that
well, yeah. Well, I do have Living Waters Professional Dowsing Services on my business card. Yeah.
and then there's the water bearer on it, right? You're
That's
the
right.
Aquarius water bearer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just love all the connections there.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yes, I was born um, on Groundhog's Day, which happens to be the quarter day of Symbolic. So
Oh,
it's right in midwinter.
gotcha.
Um,
That's
but
interesting.
according to Rudolf Steiner, it's also the very day where the Earth breath is at its peak of inhalation
Hmm.
that the Earth breathes one complete cycle per year. So the 6 months later, after in August, that's when the out breath is at its furthest extent.
That makes sense because you get some heat with the
Yeah.
exhalation.
And so because it's at the peak of the in breath in midwinter,
Hmm.
when the Earth is most alive, actually,
Yeah.
underground. Um, it's, yeah, going back to something you said, that's when the Earth, particularly the crystals,
Hmm.
the crystalline parts of the Earth and the metals, take in all that information that the cosmos is streaming down.
That makes a lot of sense, Steve, because at least, and of course, this is all basically most relevant to the northern hemisphere, but the trees have lost all their leaves. So it's like that if you think about the information coming from the sun, even though the days are shorter, it's like they can get to the ground
Mm.
because
Hmm.
the leaves
Hmm.
aren't there.
Right.
Not that it has to be that literal, but I kind of had a vision of that, like the information making it through
Yeah.
without that
Yeah.
leaf cover.
Well, in summer, according to Rudolf Steiner, the leaves are taking in this information from the compost, from the cosmos, and
Mhm.
streaming it down through their
Mm,
own bodies um, to the earth.
cool. Well, was there anything else you wanted to share related to your story?
Talked about experiences before and experiences after, um, which that they continue, and
Hmm.
synchronicities
Hmm.
just keep popping up, all around me. I
Hmm.
um, pay more attention to that. Yeah.
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 That kind of shows you're in the flow, right?
Hmm. So, um, yeah, I think about this. That I started um, investigating the um, the Pentecostals as people who um, have a way to access abilities, powers, knowledge that not available to them otherwise. And oh, I wanted to mention too that I also, besides doing all this reading research about cultures all over the world and through time, I did have an opportunity to visit one other group, uh, to have some, part of my field work
Hmm.
be not just totally about Pentecostals, but
Okay.
I also spent some time with people of the Native American Church.
Hmm.
That is the people, uh, the Native Americans who involved in their religion of the Native American Church in the ritual of taking the peyote.
Hmm.
It's often called the peyote religion, and one of the professors on my committee was actually Carl Maloof. He was instrumental in advocating for the Native Americans and convincing the government to um, allow them to practice their peyote religion legally.
Oh, interesting.
So I did attend drumming ceremonies and things like that with the Native American church. And had I been there long enough, I'm sure they would have offered the peyote to me, but
Mhm.
um, I left before that could happen. Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like an initiation rite that you
Right.
probably needed to earn somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you
Mhm.
So you had that experience where right after in Great Falls where you slayed the woman with the spirit.
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
you ever practice anything like that or any healing
Well,
again
well,
after
I
that?
actually I was um, telling um, a woman among my group of New Age friends
Mhm.
about this,
Mhm.
and she sort of challenged me to try that on her.
Uh-huh.
And um, so I did, but made sure there was like a couch or something behind her to fall on.
Yeah.
And, yes, I did that. In the name of Jesus, be healed. And she sort of swaggered and you know had a hard time holding her balance because I she was fighting it though, you know.
Yeah.
She was resisting it, but
Yeah.
it definitely was affecting her. Yeah,
Wow.
but but I haven't since.
Okay. It's
I
so interesting too, the words. The words are almost like a spell. Like it's I wonder like if you could just do it with an intention or if you need to say the words. It's
I
interesting.
would probably use different words.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fascinating. You know what? The person I was telling you about earlier who was trying to prove the Bible wrong and then had their experience, they're actually a faith healer now.
oh yeah,
Yeah, so I
yeah,
love how you caught on to all of these
yeah,
like
yeah,
scenarios and
yeah.
I can even think of, somebody where I'm seeing the same pattern.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Hmm.
And I what do you think that well, I guess I kind of want to bring up what that is. Do you feel like that energy is like universal life force? What do you feel like it is?
Oh, definitely a force.
Yeah.
Um, and universal
Mm.
too, but I know from studying Steiner that there are many, many, many kinds, different kinds of forces.
Yeah.
And what moves my dowsing rod now, I understand as being a force.
And do you have any ideas about what kind of forces? Like, would it be more elemental or would it be whatever you call in?
Um, I I don't think it's limited to the elementals. They may play a part.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, definitely in healing, I would say yes. Um, they would play a part.
Hmm.
And I think the miracles of Jesus too um, involve the elementals,
Yeah.
especially you know changing water into wine and multiplying the loaves into fishes.
Hmm. Well, any shamanic ceremony, usually starts with calling in the elements, calling in the directions. And I would say, in my mind, magic is just the ability to, I don't want to use the word manipulate, but to work with the elements and
Hmm.
to direct them, maybe, you know.
Hmm.
Um, seems like any kind
Yes.
of healing and magic that has some kind of part in it, at least in this
Hmm.
human existence.
Hmm. Um,
There are definitely some cosmic forces too, though,
yeah, yes.
which I actually do include in my mind as elemental. I think we can kind of forget, you know, um,
Hmm.
that the cosmos are just as connected to the earth, you know, as all the other elements.
Well, yeah, I have to say this. What
Mhm.
Jesus said, these things that I do, you shall also do.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
We've just forgotten.
Yeah.
I think we used to know. I think in other times of humanity, I think we used to understand these things, but I think that our consciousness goes through different waves of ascension and descension, and
Hmm.
kind of in that we're coming out of that descension and onto
Hmm.
an ascension wave where we're starting to remember. But what's so cool and interesting about it is that, it's like time is like a spiral, and um, we can't ever really completely repeat the past. It's like we could learn how to work with the elements now, but obviously now there's other forces at work like AI and things like that. So it's going to look totally different. And
Hmm.
it's up to us, um, you know, how it will go, it feels like. But then again, I also kind of feel like there's an overall pattern that might, distinguish like where we're headed as well.
Uh, Definitely.
Again, it's both. It's like
Yeah.
it's both.
Yeah. Well, I, I began studying um, individuals and cultures who are able to um, tap into these ways of gaining abilities and knowledge that not normally available. And and then I found out I look at myself and it turns out I've become one.
Mhm.
You know, with dowsing, finding water underground, moving underground streams, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and you teach a lot as well. You share a lot of
Mhm.
your knowledge, which is really awesome.
Hmm. So Wendy, I'm anxious to hear your story and what kind of common points that we might see along the way.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm excited to be able to bounce off of some things from your story. And I have to tell you too, I'm inspired to write something at some point. That I'm inspired by your article because I've found a lot of, commonalities between my own story and a lot of ancient things, mostly with Egypt and the feminine mysteries, but I'll kind of get into that as I go. So,
Uh-huh. Yeah, it
so
complement very well, I'm sure.
yeah. Um, and there's definitely a lot of overlap, which is cool.
Mhm.
So my story sort of starts with like a tragedy, I would say, like a descent into the underworld, which is
Mhm.
a very kind of feminine mystery. Um, you hear about Inanna, who represents Venus, going into the underworld and meeting her sister, who's the
Uh-huh.
queen of the underworld. And she kind of has to release all of these garments as she descends. And she's
Uh-huh.
stripped naked. And then she can really see her true self. And
Uh-huh.
then she makes her way back out of the underworld, reclaiming these different pieces of herself. And she returns as a new version. And, of course, that cycle of Venus happens over and over and over again. And I think that for me, when I first kind of uh, embarked on this journey, I thought it was just going to be one and done, like one
Uh-huh.
experience and that was it. But no, like you said, we can experience these things at different degrees throughout our life. But for me, I think I started out as an artist as a kid and a pianist and a musician. I was always really creative. And then when I went to art school, I went to like a really fancy, expensive art school. I ran out of money to keep going. So I dropped out of art school and kind of swore off a lot of the I guess I would say what I considered impractical things. And eventually, to make a long story short, I ended up becoming a farmer, which is probably like the most
Uh-huh.
practical thing you could think of,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but also very creative. So, similar to
Uh-huh.
you, I feel like I had a really strong connection with the earth. And
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of my experiences just being in nature and witnessing the cycles of nature and the different animals, it just brings you to this present state, you know? And I think that I was sort of on this path um, of learning and studying without really being conscious of it, you know? And so there was a time where I was working so hard farming, actually, I went through adrenal fatigue and I could like almost couldn't do anything. And that's
Wow.
when I
Mm.
discovered yoga. I realized I needed to take care of myself. So I started doing yoga, which started training me to regulate my nervous system and also to open up uh, to all these other things. And again, that wasn't intentional. It just kind of came with the process. And um, it was 2019 that I tragically lost my mother. And that is really, I would say, the beginning of my, big experience. So it was such a reality shattering event that it felt like my soul fragmented into all of these different pieces outside of me.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
felt like I was looking down on my life and I could see why everything had happened. Like I could see
Wow.
why I had been farming, why I'd been doing yoga, why my family was like this and that, how they played out their roles. It was like I was watching a movie of my life and it felt really weird. Um, and so that was like my underworld experience
Uh,
was
uh.
like, and some people would say dark night of the soul, So it was about a year after that, I just started asking a lot of questions because when your reality kind of gets shattered, you start questioning everything. So
Mhm.
I also became interested in the paranormal. My mom was always interested in that. She was into ghost hunting. She had dowsing rods for detecting ghosts.
Uh,
She was learning Reiki. She was kind of like on a spiritual path, but I always, I'm a Capricorn, and I have a lot of Earth in my chart, so I'm a very like practical person, and I would always, and she was more like a watery Piscean type, and loved like all of the spiritual stuff, and would get really into it, and I would always be like, take that lightly, mom, like take that with a grain of salt. I was like the skeptic.
mhm. Uh-huh.
So I always thought it was fascinating and entertaining, but I wasn't like a major believer like she was, you
Uh-huh.
know? So it was interesting when she passed, it kind of felt like she passed a torch to me in a way. Like there was
Yep.
some ancestral work possibly that she had done that she was, it was like, okay, now it's time for you to take this on and to keep
Mhm.
going. And so as time passed, it was around the fall of 2020, leading up to this big Saturn and Jupiter conjunction, um, I had met a friend who was an astrologer, Stevie, who's on my podcast sometimes of Farmhouse Moon. And she had read my chart, and this was before everything happened with my mom. And I had gone back and listened to the recording, and all of these things she said were coming made sense suddenly. And it gave me this feeling of, okay, so things don't just happen for no reason. There must be a reason. It helped me find some meaning, um, and helped me realize like, okay, there's something else behind reality. There's other plans at play, and
Mhm.
there might be a divine design here as well. And suddenly it was like there was this inner voice telling me I needed to learn astrology. So luckily, Stevie had taught a course and she had it all recorded. and she let me just buy the course and watch the videos, and she was gonna like send me a video a week. And I was like, okay, I watched the first video. Can you send the next one? I just devoured it. Like
Uh-huh.
I took it so quickly, and it was like I was remembering. And she said
Hmm.
that when I was talking to her after the classes, she was like, "You're getting this really fast. It's wild. It's just like you're remembering it." And I had these expansions of consciousness, like you're talking about. Like I would
Hmm.
just suddenly, I would have these kind of intuitive hits about these different books I needed to read. And then as I'm reading a book about like alchemy, I literally just felt like I was remembering as I was reading it. I was like, I barely needed to read it. Like I was just absorbing the information from the pages.
Hmm.
And it was so bizarre to me. I was like, how do I know this? I don't understand how I
Uh-huh.
know this already. And so after I learn astrology, I start hearing people talk about this big Saturn and Jupiter conjunction. And Stevie decides to release a class about Saturn. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh, okay, I got to take that. And she's like, we're looking at my chart, and she's like, oh, this conjunction is actually happening right on your natal sun and Venus in your chart. And she was like, she would always encourage us to go outside, look for the planet we're studying, and
Hmm.
to even meditate with the planet, which honestly, at the time, I didn't even understand. I was like, meditate with a planet. It's just
Hmm.
went over my head at the time. And so, what is interesting though is she said, go outside and look at them. So, it was coming up on the winter solstice, and that's also significant. Not only were Jupiter and Saturn conjuncting at 0 degrees Aquarius, it was also happening on the winter solstice. So, I think that's another reason a lot of people relate it to the birth of Christ and the Star of Bethlehem, because it was around the same time of year that we celebrate Christmas, or many people
Hmm.
think he was born. People will debate that too. But anyway, I went outside and I looked up in the sky, and it was wild because Saturn and Jupiter were together, and they were so bright. They were just like the brightest star. And not only that, it was like Saturn almost zoomed up to me, and his rings were just shining at me. Like I could see this
Oh,
little
wow.
like, sparkle going around his rings. So it was like this planet was really speaking to me. And I was just like, wow, that is so cool. And I decided to do this meditation. This was like the night before the solstice. And in the meditation, I had this really wild experience. So, pretty interesting too. My husband um, he did the meditation with me, but he didn't make it through the whole thing. So, we're laying down on the floor listening to this woman guide this meditation. And she says, there are these 12 light beings coming in, and I could see them in my mind's eye. And I sneezed actually. And my husband got up and left the room. And I thought to myself, that's strange. I must have disturbed him. And then but I was so deep into the meditation, I didn't want to get up and see what was going on. I was just like, I'll stay here. So these light beings come in, and they're surrounding me, and they were just I don't know how to describe them, except they looked like human figures, except they were completely made of light. And
Mhm.
they were surrounding me, and one of them came down and put their fingers on my forehead and was tapping my forehead on the right side, and the right side of my brain felt like it was reinflating. It was like this electrical energy coming
Mhm.
into my forehead. And then we had like a life review. So I looked at the time that I was born until where I had come to now. And I had just, given myself a lot of compassion for all the really hard stuff that I've been through.
Hmm.
And I could see my future self on this pathway. And I kind of looked Christ-like. Like I don't think I would have thought of it that way at the time, but I can see it in retrospect because I had a glowing heart and my hands were down and they were open and my hands were glowing, kind of like how you see Jesus depicted with the
Hmm.
sacred
Hmm.
heart and everything.
Hmm.
And I merged with that future self. And it was like I was merging with my divine self and my higher self. And when we came out of this meditation, it was wild. I was just like seeing the clouds change into all of these different shapes, like into dragons and angels, and my dog's face and eyes. And
Hmm.
it was almost like my mind was shifting the clouds in the sky. And I was
Hmm.
like, this is really wild. And I felt this huge expansion of my crown chakra. And it just felt like this ball of electricity was it was like sitting on top of my head and funneling all of this information into my body. And I was thinking to myself, this is what you see in the depictions of the Egyptian gods, where they have the horns and they have the sun disk on their head. I was like, I have that on my head right now. Like
Oh,
that's what it feels like.
oh,
And
uh-huh.
I started remembering a lot about ancient Egypt. Um, it was really wild. And I could actually see how my own story of what I had been through correlates so much with the story of Isis and Osiris. And I felt like all of those fragments that had kind of separated from me a year prior had all come back to me. It was like that and more because there was sort of like the Egyptian memories. I can't say which ones were really personal versus universal. It's really hard for me to decipher between the two. Um, but it felt like past life memories, if that makes sense. It just
Hmm.
not necessarily super personal feeling. But what happened right after the meditation is I walked out of the room. I asked my husband why he left because I feel like I'm in this completely different reality now and like he didn't make it with me.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, why did you leave? And he told me and he's kind of making fun of it, after the light beings came in, the front door blew open. So I got up, I heard it, and I got up and went to shut the front door.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then he didn't come back. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's
Oh,
really interesting.
like they came through the front door?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, um,
Maybe it was meant just for you
yeah,
anyway.
I think so. I think it was all divine, but at the moment, I felt like we were both gonna like transcend into some other reality together.
Hmm.
We should have, and he didn't make it or whatever. And that was
Uh-huh.
just a little thing for a minute. But I was like suddenly remembering all of this stuff from the Bible, and I felt like
Mhm.
I was in the Bible. So
Oh, uh-huh.
we have this big apple tree in the center of our property. And it turns out the name of our farm before we moved here was called Third Day Farm. So it was on
Uh,
the third day that Christ rose and ascended. And
hmm.
but at the time, I was also interpreting it a different way. It was on the third day that God created paradise. And I was like, this is our paradise, and you're Adam, and I'm Eve, and that's the tree of knowledge. And like it was on the brink, I would say, of like I I want to be careful saying this, but it could have been like almost a psychotic break, if that makes sense. It was
Hmm.
almost like I was on the brink of psychosis because
Hmm.
I wasn't in the 3D, just the 3D reality. I was in a lot of different realities. And it
Uh-huh.
was like this for 3 days. and not in my sleep, walking around, just having all of this information funnel into me,
Hmm.
having all of these memories and connections and just really wild experiences. And then it was time to go visit family for Christmas.
Uh-huh.
So Matt's like, and I'm so lucky because my husband's like a rock. Like he's my rock. And he didn't freak out at all. Like he, I don't know how he wasn't worried. He
Uh-huh.
was just like flowing with it.
Yeah.
It was funny. I was telling him, I was like, I think I'm going to be able to see auras and stuff. Like, this is
Mhm.
wild. Like, I can see so much, like I know all of this stuff. And he was like, can you be normal when we visit my family? And I was like, yeah. I was like, that will bring me right back to earth. Boy, did it. Oh boy. I felt like when I came back to like reality and like unhealthy family dynamics, I
Mhm.
just came crashing down. I came
Uh,
crashing down from those higher worlds. And it was kind of hard. And I was really irritable. And for me, it felt like that all that light that came into my body illuminated so many shadows. It illuminated
uh-huh.
so much stuff that I didn't even know I had going on
Uh-huh.
within me or around me. So that was a process to work through. And the other process I had asked you earlier, and I had mentioned kind of the danger of feeling like better than or whatever. One thing I experienced was after this experience, I kind of thought that I just knew everything because that's how it felt, you know,
Uh-huh.
for 3 days.
Yeah.
And I luckily another planet moved onto my sun and Venus not long after, and his name is Pluto.
Mm.
So Pluto came along and showed me, he helped me balance my power, and helped me sort of see more shadows and just work through a lot of stuff and humbled me. I had to definitely go through a process of humbling. And so it was a really interesting experience because now I definitely have heightened intuition. I can help people heal, like I do Akashic Records reading and I do healing through the records. Not that I'm necessarily the healer, I help people heal themselves, but I have the awareness to see what needs the healing or where the issue is.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and then it also opened me up to be able to channel or maybe even just to realize when I was um, channeling different deities or elements or the earth, pretty much anything, deceased people. Um, it really opened up a lot. And when it's kind of like that must be what Pandora's box is, right? Like that's what it felt like. It was opening Pandora's box.
Uh-huh.
And I even had some really funny little like synchronicities happen where I was driving down the highway and it was like Matt was like sort of saying things to me at the time about, messing with stuff or opening Pandora's box or things
Mhm.
like that. And not related to this whole, you know, mystical experience, but just other things in life. I remember I was driving down the highway one day and I thought I saw a black puddle on the highway. And as I got closer, I'm driving pretty fast. I realized it's a black trash bag. And just ran over it. I couldn't do anything else. And
Uh-huh.
stuff went everywhere. And I just thought,
Mhm.
God, this is just like the Eve story, like this is the story of the feminine is like when you open up to these other realms, in a way, it's like playing with fire. Um,
Mhm.
you open up a lot. And it's interesting, and it brings it back kind of to the mystic light and the fire.
Huh.
But
Mhm.
yeah, it was definitely very healing for me, and then began this kind of journey of mysticism and self-work and service too. So it's been quite the journey.
Oh, self-work, meaning working on yourself. Or
Yeah,
is that what?
like
Yeah.
recognizing, like doing shadow work, recognizing what I'm unconscious of, and
Hmm.
integrating that, doing inner child healing. It's been a lot of healing, I feel like, for me, and
Uh-huh.
I think that a lot of us right now have have been souls that have chosen to take that on for our families, for our ancestors, or even just our immediate family. And I
Hmm.
think that as we transmute it in ourselves, we're transmuting it for much more than just ourselves. Um,
Yes.
for our, previous family line, our future family line, the people around us. I've witnessed a lot of growth in parallel with my own growth, if that makes sense. Like,
Hmm.
and it's kind of interesting too, because it's the more that I change my perception, or the more that I can accept myself and accept other people, it seems the more these like more negative aspects or shadow aspects sort of just dissipate, like
Uh-huh.
they become integrated. And so I think that, yeah, it felt, my experience felt really cosmic, more so than like kind of religious, like,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the light being vision was sort of suggested, but also I have had other experiences where I've seen myself as one of those beings. And when I could see myself as that and connected with other people, like in a group meditation, um, all I could feel was like home. It just felt like the most amazing sense of love and home that I've ever felt. And when I came out of that, I was like sobbing. I just felt so homesick,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like you just don't feel that amount of love, you know, in everyday normal life all at once. Like we definitely
Yeah.
feel it, but to a different degree. And so,
Yeah.
I feel like we're all stars. Like we're
Hmm.
all that mystic light. Like we're all these little stars. And um, they say as above, so below. You look up in the sky, it's like I don't necessarily know what all of those stars represent, but it feels like when we die, that's where we go, And then when we're born,
Hmm.
that's where we come from,
Uh-huh.
which is just kind of like, in a way, you can see all those stars as like a fragment of another bigger star, our sun, our central sun,
Hmm.
and there's the galactic center, but then there's infinite amounts of universes. So it's infinite. You can't really describe it. But that's, what I feel like I connected to. But what's so funny is that just being a single human being, even though I felt like I was connecting to everything and all knowledge, I still can only actually experience a tiny fraction of it. You know?
Uh, like what I described as the expanded state of consciousness versus what you what funnels down to what you're walking around with every day.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like my like I said, my story relates to like the story of Osiris and Isis. And one of my favorite parts about that story is, um, it tells us a lot about duality, like Osiris's brother Set kills him and cuts him into 14 pieces. And I felt like when my mother died, and by the way, it was her twin who actually killed her. So that represents that duality right there. Like, wow, your own sibling could do that to you, It was like I shattered into those 14 pieces. And when I had this experience of remembering and healing, that felt like Isis coming and picking up my 14 pieces and putting me back together
Oh,
again.
uh-huh.
And and then through that, it was after she reassembled Osiris, she divinely conceived Horus, which also kind of overlaps with the story of Mary and Christ. And so then it was like once I was reassembled, I was reborn as like Horus, as the son of God, or
Oh,
like a realizing my inner solar being.
so that was the Egyptian version of Immaculate Conception.
Yeah.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah. So it was actually Horus was there when she was divinely conceiving him. And she actually turned into, it was really funny. She collected all of Osiris' pieces, except she couldn't find his phallus. It was eaten by a fish. So she
Uh-huh.
fashioned one out of gold, or some stories
Uh-huh.
say crystal. And she actually turned into a kite and hovered over him and conceived that way. And it's really interesting because I think that there's debate about whether divine conception was actually a thing, but I do think it was. I think humans used to parthenogenetically procreate, like just divide. And I think that the feminine mysteries going back to that is actually it just evolved into divine conception. But you know, not to go off on it, that's like going off on a total tangent. But yeah, that's where those stories overlap. And then this kind of leads to the stories of um the kings, right? Like kings having divine authority. They were
Mhm.
usually born through people who had been initiated into the mysteries or by priestesses who had been initiated into that process of divinely conceiving, whether they actually physically conceived or not. And a lot of times it was like they would actually physically conceive, but it was thought that they could bring through that divine soul and that they would have the right to rule because they would be ordained by God or whatever. But now
Mhm.
where we're coming into this age of Aquarius, the I feel the opportunity with us seeing a lot of corruption in our governments and leaders and things is for us to realize we all hold that and we can all be our own authority rather than keeping on putting that authority outside of ourselves, just like
Mhm.
we've done with religion.
Mhm.
So that's kind of a lot of the things that have come through for me over the past few years is a lot about that inner power and because my sun and Venus are in Capricorn, which kind of represents that patriarchal matriarchal energy. I don't know if I have a past with that and I'm, reconciling or healing something with it, but that's what's on my radar a lot of times with this whole shift in consciousness is the authority aspect. And with Aquarius, it's more about collaboration, power to the
Uh-huh.
people. And so I think that, we're seeing that kind of play out.
So you are a Capricorn,
Yep.
right? Uh-huh.
But my Capricorn is at the very end. So it's still conjunct that 0 degrees Aquarius. It's only two
Uh-huh.
degrees away. So that
Uh-huh.
conjunction still technically happened on my sun and Venus, if that makes
Mm,
sense.
mm, mm, mhm,
Usually, when you have signs, well, especially at the last degree of a sign, if you have planets at the last degree of a sign, which mine's not at the last, it's at like the second to last, but that is a very karmic degree. So, like, you're really coming here to wrap something up if you
mhm,
have a planet
uh-huh,
there.
yeah, uh-huh,
I was told by another astrologer that she said when she looked at my sun and Venus in Capricorn, which is in the 10th house, which is where Capricorn is at home, the 10th house is very public and being seen. She said, I'm here, the 28th degree can represent somebody who's here to be well known. And she interpreted it as I'm here to bring the mysteries to the masses or to a lot of regular people. So
mhm,
I think it's really interesting that through my experience, I felt like I downloaded the mysteries or
uh-huh,
gained access to them, and
yeah,
that's like I've been sharing about it as much as I can or as much as I can understand, ever since. And something that's really interesting about that as well is when I was having all these like rememberings about the goddesses and divine conception and divine authority and priestesses, uh, I created a presentation and I actually had to do a lot of inner work to finish the presentation because I was sort of being guided that I was personally projecting my own wounds in through the presentation because and I think I still probably can do it sometimes because
mhm,
there's such a massive feminine wound from all of the witch burnings and the suppression of the feminine
uh-huh,
that it can be really hard for people not to project that and judge the patriarchy and all of that. So I had a past life vision that actually showed me myself as a perpetrator of a woman. And
oh, uh-huh,
as had this vision, it was like my higher self floated over to like the quote unquote evil version of me. And
mhm,
I said, I forgive you for wanting to experience this facet of consciousness. And when I said that, it released something in me. And I didn't feel like I was holding that grudge or that pain anymore. And I
but,
thought it was so interesting for it to be shown to me as I'm the perpetrator, not just the victim,
mhm,
you know?
yeah. So you're saying this to yourself?
Basically. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So that's kind of been my journey. And trying to think if there was anything. I think I kind of covered a lot of those points that you mentioned in your article, as I tell this
mhm,
story.
mhm,
Oh, the other overlap
the,
we have, Steve, is leading up to the meditation and my experience. I had a crazy fever um, and I got really sick. And it felt like I get the vision of like a locust bursting out of a shell. It's almost
mm,
like there was a shedding of some energy or vibration through that fever so that I could,
oh, mhm,
accept whatever was coming. That's
yeah,
how I
yeah,
felt about it.
yeah, thinking about my experience, I needed to have that case of the flu, I guess. Um, that put me in the right space of not thinking of anything else about just keeping it together.
Mm-hmm.
And and then experiencing being totally healed instantly
Mm-hmm.
without having to go through a really serious disease.
Right. Yeah, and it makes me feel like um it was destined to happen. Like, for you to get that flu prior,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Probably was a test too. Test my
Mm.
resolve to go there.
Yeah, actually, as you were
Yeah.
telling the story, I was like, wow, he was really determined to go.
Yeah. You don't always know whether that's a sign you're not supposed to do it or designed to
Press
test your
through.
resolve see if you earned it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say too, like through the past few years, I think the other test that I've come up against over and over again has been discernment. And and recently I'm happy to say that I finally feel like I can lean on my intuition more than ever. Because I think for a long time I wasn't sure how to decipher between fear and intuition. But it took enough times
Hmm.
of me seeing something that was going to happen and then for me to go through with it anyway and then go, oh, my intuition was
Hmm.
actually showing me for me to believe myself or trust myself.
Oh,
Because
uh-huh.
sometimes you can actually just be fearful of something and and
Hmm.
um and think it's your intuition, but it takes a lot of practice to be able to know the difference
Yeah.
of,
Yes.
yeah, am I projecting my fear or is my intuition trying to tell me something, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's an ongoing process.
Right. Right. Really not let yourself being led to by fear,
Yeah,
one way or
yeah.
another. Yeah.
And there was one other experience that I've actually recorded on my podcast. People can go listen to it in Sedona, um, where it was my friend Sarah's birthday, and she invited us all out. And I started having, I'll just make a long story short, but I started having Native American spirits visiting me in my dreams.
Uh-huh.
And kind of showing me that I should be doing a ceremony in Sedona.
Uh-huh.
And when we got there, I wasn't super fixated on it. I just kind of told everyone about it and things
Hmm.
just fell into place and we did it. And we ended up all having a very cosmic experience.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I was like, wow, I'm glad that I listened to my intuition because that was kind of incredible, and it was a land healing, but then I recorded the podcast with everybody who was there. So when you listen to it, you can hear everybody's individual experience and how our experiences overlapped, which is really cool because a lot of
Uh-huh.
times mystical
Uh-huh.
experiences are more individual. And in
Uh-huh.
this case, we could all kind of corroborate each other's stories because we
Uh,
had experienced
yes.
very similar things. So that was pretty cool.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an amazing story. Um, I'm intrigued by the light beings you saw. Um,
Yeah.
and uh, did did the sight of them evoke an emotion? Um,
Not a
well,
super strong one.
yeah.
Um, I think because I was like not sure what to feel,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
'Cause it was like it was familiar but also new, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It's like they were
Yes.
familiar energies, but I also had never experienced anything like that in my life. Like
Uh-huh.
this whole experience of feeling that electricity come through my head.
Hmm.
It's just unbelievable. I mean, I guess that might be kind of similar to being slain by the spirit. I hadn't really thought about that till right now.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Um, but just kind of in a different context.
Yeah. Touching you on
Uh,
the forehead.
yeah, and I was already laying down, so I didn't have to fall
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
the meditation I was on Zoom, and there were about 1,000 other people on the meditation. So there
Oh.
also could have been a collective energy there, like you said in your
Yeah.
setting, because even these things translate virtually. You don't have to be in person
Yes.
necessarily.
Right. right.
So that's pretty interesting. And oh, you made me think of something else. Oh, I guess I just wanted to emphasize how logical I was uh and rational before all of this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what's wild is when you're like, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
magic and other dimensions
Yeah,
and realities are real.
yeah, right. Uh, Um, yeah, I guess I missed a chance to make a point earlier that what I saw in those hundreds of people in the image and likeness of Jesus, that um, like I said about the mystic light in general, is you have to have the eyes to see it.
Hmm,
Um, it's not automatic. Um,
right.
and so I had the eyes to see not just one, but hundreds.
You know what I'm kind of feeling and hearing as you say that is that you have to have the heart to see it.
Mm, yes.
It's like a
Uh-huh.
more than the eyes even, you
Right.
know?
Or yeah, it's the heart is definitely in that. Yeah.
Hmm. And it's kind of interesting to think like, gosh, what does bring on that sudden like cracking open, you know?
Hmm.
Obviously, like in my case and a lot of other people's cases, a lot of times it will start with some kind of tragedy. Um,
Hmm.
and other people, it's more gradual and just happens one day.
Right. Yeah. It would, it, at the beginning at least, it felt like a tragedy that my whole career that I spent years working up to just fell apart all at once.
Right.
Yeah. My whole career just bottomed right out.
You weren't expecting that.
I wasn't, you know,
Hmm.
and it did well. A dark night of the soul also always feels like a tragedy,
Yeah.
but it was my time to leave Montana, and my new life involves getting back east and hooking up with the American Society of Dowsers.
Yeah. Well, this is what's so interesting about these experiences that I feel like we are being shown when they happen. And it's still, as a human being, it can be so hard to accept that um, some of our greatest discoveries come from our greatest tragedies. And it's
Yes.
sort of that saying, like, there can't be light without dark. Um,
Hmm.
it's like that's the experience we came here for, because
Hmm.
otherwise, if we just lived in that mystic light, eventually we might just get bored.
Yeah.
As good as it feels, I think if you got used to it, there'd be no drama, you know?
Yeah, right. Uh-huh. Mm.
So it's such an interesting thing to be human and to witness some of the craziest atrocities on Earth. And then to also be able to zoom out and see, like, what are we supposed to be learning, or what are the
Hmm.
opportunities here?
Hmm.
I think that's something that keeps me sane in my own life, or can help me get through hard things, is zooming out and taking like a higher perspective of my situation, and seeing, okay, well, what is the lesson here? Or what could I do to shift things in a different direction? Or a lot of times, what it comes down to for me is, how can I surrender? Like sometimes it's so hard to let go of control and to just surrender. And a lot of times that is just the key, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Actually, what you just said all sounds like a good way to wrap up this whole talk. Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Any closing thoughts?
Uh, well, I just emphasize, what I saw in my vision that um, I feel I was seeing something universal, a universal truth, and it is the future, and it is our path ahead.
Yeah.
And and those of us brave enough to be in the front lines and help make that a reality for everyone.
Yeah. It's funny. It is like a courageous journey, but it can be fun.
Uh, yes. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
feels like a lot more work, but then there's that much more
Yeah.
reward.
Yeah. Well, I think we're meant to make have bring heaven right down to earth and
Yeah.
make heaven here. Yeah.
Yeah. Bring the two closer together. Yeah.
Mhm.
And like dissolve these barriers that make the duality just so mm, contrasting, if that makes
Mhm. Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yes.
You know?
Mhm. Uh-huh.
Like, because then if we had just a little bit wider perspective where we could put ourselves in other people's shoes, you know,
Hmm.
we would all have more compassion for each other
Oh,
and want to be kinder to each other, you know?
yeah. Be be empathic and be kind. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm gonna say one more thing too,
Hmm.
because it feels like with these nodes, the Aries North node and the Libra South node, something I think that's also important to keep in mind is to protect your light as well. You know, like as well as being empathic and compassionate, it's also important to respect yourself and learn how to set boundaries and things when you need to as well. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
everybody should be able to do that.
Yes.
I think that's kind of something we're learning right now with that North Node
Hmm.
in Aries is
Yeah.
like, how do I stop doing what other people expect of me and follow my true north?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was awesome, Steve. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you
Yes.
sharing your
Has
story.
been. Yeah. I appreciate your coming along in my life and be the impetus for my being on this journey, doing these podcasts and
Yeah, my pleasure.
getting more out in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad the Wizard of Oz brought us together.
Mhm. From Wizard of Oz to Dracula to the Mystic Light.
Yep,
Wonder what our next step will be.
we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode. And if you'd like to get in touch with Steve, you can reach him at waterdowser@hotmail.com. And you can follow me on Instagram at light.alwayswins. Be sure to check out the show notes for a link to Steve's article, as well as the video we mentioned in the beginning. If you like this podcast, do us a favor and leave us a review. We'd really appreciate it as it helps more people find the episodes. And until next time, remember, light always wins.